Hello and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. My name is Gail Martin, and tonight we are going to talk about magic. And not just magic, but we are going to talk about who had it, who didn't, how it differed, and was Sam really Rowena's witchy heir? But before we dive into all of that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Hansi.
Hi, I'm Hansi Oppenheimer of Squee Projects, and I am an ACA fan and documentarian.
All right, Elektra.
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and a copy editor, and I've been watching Supernatural since that very first episode aired, and it hooked me right from the very start.
All right. And I'm Gail Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk right into and feel right at home. I just love the show, and I fell in love halfway through season 11 and haven't hit bottom on the rabbit hole ever since, and hope I never do. So let's start out by talking a little bit about magic itself, because over the course of the show, we meet people who use magic. We meet creatures that might themselves be magic, and then we meet highly powered beings that I'm not sure we would actually term as magic. How do you explain those distinctions or draw those lines? Hansi?
Well, I think it's complicated, especially in Supernatural universe, because mortals can do magic, where it's not just, you don't have to have a specific, talent to be able to do it, and honestly, out of every character at some point or another has some sort of like omnipotent power. So I think it's hard, but I think the Supernatural wiki says it's kind of like the powers that be, the natural order is what they said is the top layer of power.
Okay. Well, we know how Winchesters were with the natural order. Elektra?
Well, witchy power apparently was something that you could be born with, but also something you could study to do. So anybody could learn how to make like witch killing bullets once you had the spell and the ingredients and you just mixed them up proper and read the incantation. So, men of letters, Bobby, everybody could do it. And I think some of them figured out spells. I think Bobby had figured out how to make like the bullets for the cult, even though he wasn't a witch. Somebody figured those out. So they didn't draw a really good line between born witches and made witches.
Yeah, I mean, there was that slight distinction where they're in Maleficarum, where those witches have sold their souls to get that power. But then, like you said, there's just regular people like Bobby doing spells.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that you had people who were born with a certain degree of talent. Then you had people who could study really hard and maybe make up for not being born with it. And maybe they would never be the ultimate master witch like someone born with it, but they could go far. And then you had creatures like the Xana that kind of were themselves magical. And then you had creatures like Chuck, which were high-powered, supernatural, but not what we would really call magical.
Well,
at least that's
the
kind of
leprechaun
where
was absolutely magical.
Pardon?
The leprechaun was absolutely magical.
And the Fae, fight the fairies.
Smash the freaking fairies.
So, okay, now that we got the definitions out of the way, let's talk about who had the magic and, maybe who didn't. Hansi?
Like I said, it's so hard. Like my first instinct would be to go with Rowena because, she's lasted this long and she just keeps learning more and ends up as the queen of hell. So I mean, she just kept accumulating power. Whereas other people came into it and were destroyed by it, or, you know, had to, or lost it, or gave it up, willingly gave it up.
Okay, Elektra?
There are so many of them that are magical. I mean, there were a whole slew of witches like Broomhilda, who was stealing life force from young girls by promising them, I'll teach you to be a witch. Here, just wear this amulet. You know, it's a gift. And she was using it to steal their life force in the Scar, I think. And there was James, and we got introduced into that whole world of familiars and witches and how the bond was supposed to work and how it might not be working right. And the 900-year-old witch who whispered magic onto the poker chips. There were a lot of people imbued with power, and some of them were chaotic neutral, maybe. And some of them were definitely leaning toward evil. And some of them were, I'm just going to do whatever the hell is good for me this week.
Cass tried to be good by becoming God, but that didn't end well.
Right, right. Well, and then you had some that sort of an odd thing to do if you have that much power, but okay, you be you. With guys like Patrick, with the
Patrick was a 900-year-old witch, right?
Yeah, the 900-year-old witch who was stealing, you know, life from people by playing poker with them and beating them. You know, honestly, I'd just go on a eternal vacation through the best tourist spots in Europe if I was immortal. But he wants to sit in a hotel and cheat people out of poker. Go figure. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that was an interesting use of power.
Okay, I see what you're looking at.
Yeah.
I think too, you know, with the bringing in the men of letters changes the whole thing too, because then I mean, they were amazing as researchers, you know, as we knew them as hunters. But then to add the men of letters thing, and you know, there's this whole association of people that organized and did magic together. That changed things and made Sam maybe the heir to the power.
Well, he was a legacy man of letters through Henry. So if there was anything inherited genetically, you know, he might have come by some of that naturally. But after he and Rowena quit trying to kill each other, she really kind of adopted him in that sense. And he ended up being the only living creature that could go into her apartment after her death and not be killed by her spells, which is pretty high regard for someone like Rowena.
She really liked him, given that he was the guy that was going to kill her, and she knew it.
Yeah.
And then there was Lily Sunder, who could use the power of her soul to do magic. That was a whole nother kind of magic that just popped up later in the show.
Yeah, that was an interesting sort of one-off.
But yeah, because they don't really answer where the energy of the magic comes from, except for like Lily. Okay, if you're drawing it from your soul, but were the other people drawing it from the ether? Were they drawing it from the elements? Where did the energy come from, and what did it cost to use it? It was kind of hit or miss on whether or not we saw those questions even alluded to with many of the witches.
There didn't seem to be a cost. The only time we ever really saw Rowena tired was when she did the spell to keep the rift open, and she was doing it over and over again for like 24 hours. And she started to get exhausted just from sheer tiredness. She didn't seem to get tired from doing spells.
No.
They didn't seem to have read the book that said magic must carry a cost.
So that it doesn't just become an easy out. No.
Yeah, but she had a whole arc of discovery about that too, you know. right? I mean, she had the power, but then she had to learn the responsibility of the power.
And the cost. I mean, her cost wasn't so much from being drained, but it was what her single-mindedness inflicted on everybody around her.
Yeah, she gave up everything, really, lost everything for the power.
Which I thought was very interesting when we saw her come up against that witch family in regarding Dean. It was kind of like going back to your high school reunion and confronting the mean girl. But you know, we did get some insight into how hard it was for her to claw her way up to the level of power, even if she didn't actually get to run the mega coven.
I'm still going with that.
She would have been unstoppable if she'd had a coven behind her. She apparently just had so much power that everyone was scared of her. So they just shunned her and told her that she wasn't good enough.
They didn't want to end up as hamsters.
But we also had purely magical creatures. Like there was one of the later seasons that was killing people in the forest. And he had been created from a guy that did something bad. And he just turned into this creature out of Native American legend from the area. And he just popped into being. And that was just a creature out of pure legend.
Well, to an extent, the tulpas were kind of like that because they were thought forms. And the idea was that if enough people thought something was real, they made it become real. And so I'd say that kind of counts as magic. Very primal magic.
That's groupthink. Yeah, we all believe it exists, therefore it does. And except in the show, it's made real and we have to go kill it now.
Yeah. Well, then, you know, we got to see some pretty old, pretty powerful witches. I loved James Marsters and Charisma Carpenter.
That was a great episode. I love that. That was wonderful.
As the warring witches who'd been pissed at each other since what, the 1700s?
Yeah. You know, so they were still deeply in love too. So
yeah.
They were like any married couple. It's just instead of throwing the marriage china at each other, they were, you know, throwing spells and curses back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were flirting in their own weird way. It was their love language.
That was just tremendous fun.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Honestly, some of the best episodes of this are when they inject humor in with the really gross violence and curses and blood. And
I mean, what about somebody like Loki? I mean, he had, I mean, angel first, right? But like he had enormous power to be able to, you know, change timelines and create alternate universes. And
but is that he's a god?
Yeah, he was a god. Where's the line between magic and being a god?
But that's what confuses me, like, because wasn't he an angel in like the, what do they call it, the hidden identity program, like basically hiding out as a god? Or
he was an archangel pretending to be a trickster,
right?
Wearing the face of Loki,
right.
So
yeah, so does he have the power of God, or does he have the power of the archangel, and which one's stronger?
He was kind of a special case.
He was a very special case
on many levels. Well, we love Richard Speight. Let's face it, we love him.
Well, we also got again, coming from legend and lore, Baba Yaga in season 15, Drag Me Away From You, where she went after the kids in that little town. And you know, we didn't get the house on chicken feet in the forest, but otherwise she did kind of hold to some of the old tales about her. Oh, I like your mug, Elektra.
Thank you.
So that was one that they drew from legend, just like they did with Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah, what's the one where the little girl is in a coma and the whole town, yeah, all the fairy tales, is it what it's called, fairy tale or something?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fairy tale.
But the kid's like, she's just in a coma, so why is why is this happening?
I guess you could argue that perhaps she had some level of unacknowledged ability, and with her front brain kind of turned off, it ran wild. But they didn't really, that was one where they didn't really explain where the magic came from, other than to say, you know, she was in a coma and she was acting out her stories. Sometimes we got more of an explanation than others.
Well, yeah, Dad kept reading those stories to her, even though she was in a coma.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that was her only reality. And there was also the goddess who showed up in the pool hall in Alaska after the boys drove across the frozen wasteland of Canada into Alaska.
Crossing board.
Crossing borders without problems and without their luck. And Fortuna, the goddess Fortuna, shows up, decides that they're heroes, which have been long missing from the world, and gives them the luck of heroes.
She's a goddess, and so was her son Pax. So I
Her
don't
son
know.
Pax was a demigod.
Demigod. Okay, so they have magic, but maybe is it a slightly different kind of magic than human witches have, or witches that used to be human?
Well, she was the goddess of luck, of good fortune. So all she pretty much had was the ability to give and take away luck.
Yeah.
Which is a different kind of magic. She was just manipulating people's luck.
Now, another group that, you know, talk about, you find the book and you make a very bad choice to start reading it out loud, was the guy who
That's a couple of bad movies right there.
it is. When you find the book that might be covered with human skin, don't read it out loud. It's just nothing good can come of this.
Hey, there is one good one though, starring Peter Dinklage, where they do that. But
Okay. Well, I'm thinking of Swap Meet, where they swap Sam into the nerdy teenager.
yeah, well, they knew what they were doing, and they were doing it very intentionally, those teenagers. They were practicing black magic on purpose because, you know, their parents were just too strict.
Yeah, I don't think all of them knew what was going down, though. I think one of them, right, was kind of knew what was going on.
Well,
the other one was just kind of going along.
The girl was going along because she had a crush on the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, as happens, the one guy is so focused on getting out from under the thumb of his parents, he doesn't notice that there's a really cute girl following him around with a crush on him. He wants to get away from all of this so that he can go meet real girls.
Yeah, I remember the really awkward scenes where Jared, you know, is this guy trying, this 13-year-old trying to pick up this woman. that was a great scene.
Well, it was. And, you know, you had the Barneses as well, where you had the mother,
Oh, yeah.
and then Tasha and Max, and that whole twig thing, sort of woods magic, twig magic that animated sort of a Wicker Man kind of thing.
The witch that had that one power where she could make dolls out of twigs and twine that appeared to be people.
And I always expected them to show back up again, because it was such a Sam and Dean thing to do. You know, my sister died, therefore I will make her into a twig and twine avatar, and we'll just go off the grid. It's such a
I don't remember that episode at all. Just drawing a blank on that one.
It's called Twigs and Twines and Tasha Danes, I think.
Mm-hmm. But it was one of those kind of filler episodes, and we never came back to it. Nobody ever mentioned them again, or that kind of match.
The introduction to them happens when them and their mother go up to the hunter's wake, and we discover that this guy in Canada had been introduced to hunting by Mary, and everybody knows him. I don't remember what his name is, but he's that one hunter that everybody knew and liked. He wasn't like Bobby, who knew all the lore. He was just super popular. And he was apparently Max and Tasha's dad.
Okay.
Because their mom had a fling with him.
I remember that. Yeah.
Everybody had a fling with him. He was apparently extremely good looking and kind of jolly. So,
well, and of course there's Ruby, you know, who started out, who was human and a witch, and that plays a big role in Supernatural. Dean doesn't like her right off the bat because she's a witch. Doesn't like witches because they're unhygienic.
Yeah,
yeah,
totally grossed out by them.
body parts and
Yeah, hex pads.
fluids and, ew. I don't blame him. I'm with Dean on that one.
It's interesting. I just heard a fan theory about Ruby, and that is that blonde Ruby, what if blonde Ruby and dark-haired Ruby were not the same demon? That blonde, because blonde Ruby talks about being a witch, dark-haired Ruby never talks about that. Blonde Ruby seemed to be genuinely trying to help them in ways that it didn't make sense for her to be plotting against them. Dark-haired Ruby definitely was plotting against them from the get-go.
Yeah.
So the theory was, well, what if when blonde Ruby was killed and the demon was destroyed, Lilith said, well, that didn't work the way I wanted it to. I'm going to get one of my faithful in there, and we'll just call her Ruby and Sam won't know the difference. Different meat suit. And I thought, yeah. Now there's no proving that, but I thought that was a very interesting theory.
Because they're so different too. The actresses and the way they play the character is so different. I think that's actually an interesting fan theory.
Yeah, I thought that had a lot of insight. So come on, there are
Someone
more
will write a
witches.
fanfic about it.
Go for it.
Not me. I have other things to write. I only write fanfic I get paid to write. Let's be clear. Those are the guidelines.
Okay, well, that's important to know. So I'm kind of looking through the list here. Who haven't we mentioned? Because it seemed like they were
the Wicked Witch of
yeah, the Witch of Oz.
The Wicked Witch from Oz.
Yeah,
she could do quite a bit of magic.
She was creepy.
Oh, yeah. She was super creepy.
Yeah, I thought she was one of the creepiest creatures that they had in the series, because she just.
Well, let's keep in mind that Oz was not as nice a place as they try and make you remember. And even that movie that they made of it was not as nice as you think it was, because if you were young when you saw it, those flying monkeys were scary as heck.
Oh, they still creep me out. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
The books, you know, are a lot of fun, but they have some scary stuff in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, but they're fantastical worlds. I mean, the first 14 of the books are really, really good. Sorry, Oz fan.
No, that was a terrific witch. Well, and we also had the Plum sisters. They were the ones trying to get into Rowena's apartment and steal her stuff. And we felt bad for a while for the youngest one, who seemed to get picked on. And her older sister boiled her bunny, kind of straight out of Fatal Attraction. But then
it turned out she wasn't really all that nice.
She tried to get between Sam and Dean, and oops, I'm sorry, hun, you're dead.
Didn't Dean say something about that too, like another bunny boiling? Fatal Attractions. He said something like that in just an episode I was just watching.
Well, that's the one where they also tried to, isn't that the one where they tried to put the love spell on Dean that No, because Rowena was still alive in that one. The one where they try to get him to give them the grimoire by putting a love spell on him, and then Sam and Dean have that in front of the
That
car.
was a,
It
that was
can't
a
be that
different
was
set of witches. That
Forgot
was
all about that. Yeah.
the ones that Rowena was working with, but then later betrayed because she just didn't trust them either.
Mhm.
And they tried to get the grimoire and not give it to her and just make off with it. And then they resurrected Mom, and it didn't quite go right. They turned Mom into a magic-proof zombie, which is
Mhm.
always fun.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of power, like the Nephilim, because right, Jack. I mean, that's everyone was terrified about the Nephilim happening, because right, it could have gone either way.
And he was the most powerful being in the universe.
I think, yeah, that's probably the ultimate answer, right? But
Well, but then we also had Jesse, who was sort of the reverse Nephilim, the human and a demon child. And he, we only got to see him in one episode, found out he was the most creature that we had met thus far. And he apparently went to live his life in Australia, which is apparently far enough away that no longer poses a threat to humanity. I don't know what the people in Australia felt about,
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're not worried about Australia because it's too far to take the car.
That's right. That's right. They're
You
over there
can't
on
drive
the
there, so it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There was the fellow who could do all sorts of crazy stuff just by the power of his mind.
Max.
Oh,
They
yeah.
parked in an insane asylum.
Mhm.
The old guy.
Oh, that was, yeah. Was that the one where with the cartoons where he saw he was watching the cartoon? It was of that. That's such a great episode.
He had a lot of power, and also the girl who worked in the malt shop and her dad, who was keeping the entire town happy.
Mhm.
He had incredibly powerful psychic power, and the only person stronger was the daughter.
Yeah.
He, anybody who wasn't doing what he wanted, he just, blew their heads up.
Which is interesting because we have one group that, whether they, did they need the feather to fly? Do they need the spells to focus their energy, or is that a crutch? But they believe they need the spells to do the magic. And then you've got the other folks who have the power, like the father with the malt shop and some of those folks who never go through the spell casting step, but still have this incredible power, even though they're not a god or an angel or magical non-human being. So in that sense, it's more maybe psychic ability, but where's the line?
Yeah, that all seems to be psychic ability or a branch of magic that's totally mind magic. I've seen other people call it psychica.
Yeah.
That branch of magic, where it's a different branch. Some people do use ingredients and do alchemy type magic, and other people do the magic of the mind. They can do telepathy and force you to think things you didn't want to think, and they can do telekinesis and move objects with the power of their mind. It's a whole different kind of magic.
And the people who didn't have that, generally needed to have the magical artifacts, the relics, the recipe, the book, they had to have all the stuff to be able to do it. They couldn't just, although they can exercise people just saying the word. So
well, and that really brings up a good question, because all those characteristics that Elektra just listed were ones that manifested in the psychic kids, in Azazel's kids. So were Sam's abilities latent, genetic because of Henry and the Men of Letters, or when he was working with Rowena later and doing spells? And we not only saw Bobby do spells, we saw Sam do a lot of spells. Even if it was just summoning, they were doing spells. And yet, after he came back from hell, they kind of talked and acted as if the demon's blood was gone. Did it alter him to give him those powers? Was he born with those powers because of Henry?
Henry tapped into the power of his soul to do magic,
Mhm.
like Lily Sunder.
Yeah, but
He
Sam
used
had
ingredients and then
so-
tapped into the power of his soul. Well, he may not have always tapped into the power of his soul, but he did when he time traveled, because that's a serious spell and requires a lot of mojo.
But then we saw other men of letters like Cuthbert Sinclair, who definitely could cast spells or do magical rituals. And we never got to spend enough time with them, but we did get, we certainly did get the sense that the British men of letters could do some of that. Any thoughts on that?
Well, everybody can do the ritual of exorcism if they have the right words. So it seems like chanting the right words at the right time, if you have the right objects, can get you there, depending on what you're trying to do. There were also definitely magical objects you could use without chanting anything or doing anything else, like Dean's magical thing that, lights up when God's around, except God can suppress it if he feels like it.
The Samulet. But they did come.
Canes, the job of Canes, right?
Well, and we never found out what was so special about that teddy bear from remember they went and they cleaned out the storage unit, and it had all these cursed and haunted and magical objects, and the guy kept saying, I wouldn't do that, and Sam kept picking up the teddy bear. I always wanted to know what the teddy bear did. Did it suck your soul out? Did it give you poison tea parties? I mean,
Why am I here? Was he really the bear? Called back to the bear in wishful thinking? Wishful thinking?
Yes.
It turns into a giant bear. And
I love it. The suicidal bear.
But they did come across a lot of that, and John had a lot of those curse boxes hidden in his many storage units. I would have loved to have seen a coded a Supernatural, just Sam and Dean going around and cleaning out all their dad's storage units and having misadventures. There are a number of fan fictions where they happen upon cursed or bad magic objects in different storage units in the bunker, and mayhem ensues. Because Dean was poking around in a box he shouldn't have been poking around in again.
Well, they should have cleaned out all those storage units and moved all that stuff to the bunker. I mean, when they didn't have anything else to do, that's what they should have been doing.
Yeah, or as they...
I don't know.
Who was paying for that stuff?
Happening. Didn't they always have an apocalypse that was impending? That they had
time, yeah, but there was downtime. There was downtime now and again in between eating pie.
Well, there was
watching porn.
Yeah, there was the one episode where the woman who owned the curio store had died, and her kid was selling off all the stuff that was in the safe, and she'd kept it in the safe because it was bad stuff, and then it started killing people. So, I'm always very careful if I go into an antique store. I don't touch stuff. You don't know where it's been. Of course, that was one where I think Dean, knocked the bottle ship off the shelf. It was just sort of a bull in the china.
I wonder who was making the cursed boxes, because Dean had the plans to make the box that he was going to go sit in and get thrown into the ocean that they eventually locked Jack into.
Where did they get that recipe? Someone gave him that spell for that. Was it from Michael or how?
Billy. Billy.
Was there a spell, or was it just a build it to these specifications with this stuff painted on it?
Yeah, I thought the box was somehow enchanted, but it then may have been just the way they built it, and then
and the runes on it. The same way that the bunker was, that's a whole nother kind of magic that bunkers and the silo and some other places were all made safe by warding.
Mhm. Well,
And warding is a whole nother kind of magic.
yeah, all the sigils and the runes and you know, coming back to the Werther box with Cuthbert Sinclair, that one was a blood magic one. How many times did they have to? They're always cutting their palm, which I'm thinking at this point they should not be able to hold a weapon.
Oh,
Why wouldn't you cut somewhere else? It's very dramatic. But how many times have they had to slice their palm and drip into a bowl? It's just the Werther box wanted a little more than that.
And also the idea of drawing a sigil in blood and slapping your hand onto it, and bye go all the angels in the vicinity.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
always a fun one. I wish I could do that.
They all go boom.
If I was bleeding enough to paint that sigil, I'd be unconscious, but sure.
I would have fainted because I faint at the sight of blood, particularly my own.
Yeah,
But
me
it's a
too.
nice thought that you could do that.
Yes, it is. Because, you know, at least to a certain point, you are never without a pen.
And then you also have Sam and Dean sort of being like, you know, omnipotent just because of Chuck wanting to play out this game with them, you know, but I mean, that they kept winning. Like, so I don't know where the power was in that. It's confusing, you know.
Well, and I wonder what it takes to do things like, there's apparently only a few things involved in, say, blessing water and turning it into holy water. Were they doing that themselves, or were they visiting a lot of churches and trying to explain why they needed holy water?
I would think they did it themselves, since, you know, they could do exorcisms and stuff. They could probably bless the water, but
Well, when
it's not a
Bobby
spell, it's just a few ingredients and some words and a blessing that done by a priest.
Well, when Bobby turned the sprinkler system into holy water in No Rest for the Wicked, he took a blessed rosary and dumped it in the water supply.
brilliant.
So maybe they just went around getting blessed rosaries, and if the blessing was on the rosary and you put the rosary in the water, poof, holy water. I mean,
Sure. Why not?
that way you have the priest blessing instead of just anybody, but it's a little more portable, unless you lock a priest in the trunk of the Impala and just carrying them around for emergencies.
Although, yeah, I mean, you could go into a church. You used to be able to go into any church anytime and fill up, you know, a thing. But I can't see them doing that.
Well,
They
they,
might ask you why you were doing that. They're generally pretty friendly when you walk in, but they might want to know why.
well, and they lock up churches much more than they used to. Once upon a time, they'd be open, but now they're locked down a little bit more, as well as, yes, that docent might question you as you stick your water bottle in the font.
We have a water fountain available in a restroom, you know, where you can fill up your water bottle.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Although
don't need to drink it from there.
they should have come back to the super soaker idea, because that definitely gave them more range.
Yeah, that was.
I've got to give Carlos props in the Winchester for soaking his hair with holy
Hair?
water.
Oh,
And
Carlos.
that was a L'Oreal twist.
That was
Yes.
Carlos was just amazing in general.
Mhm. Well, we saw witches in the Winchesters, because Ada wasn't Ada really a witch?
Yeah.
As well as having psychic abilities and other things. She certainly
She's
seemed to
definitely a white witch.
Mhm.
And there was much more of a push in the Winchesters to distinguish between good witches and less good witches.
Mhm. Because
And
Sam
the
and Dean
idea that
have started,
witches could be helpful.
yeah, Sam and Dean started with the opinion that all witches were bad. and they, just like all supernatural creatures were bad, and then they eventually worked their way out of that.
Yeah, once they start meeting like some of their dad's friends who are, you know, witches, and right, I forget the woman in Supernatural that they meet. That's basically, you know, the psychic, and
Missouri.
yeah, thank you, yeah, and just, you know, telling John like, why don't you talk to your boys? You know, just, you know.
Yeah, they were pretty set on killing everything, but and then oh, I have lost his name. When their friend gets turned into a werewolf and tries to explain to them that
Garth,
they're only
yeah.
eating, and Garth becomes a werewolf and is only eating cattle blood, and they're not actually killing people or bothering people.
Right.
It's hard to argue that him and his family should just be killed.
Lenore, the vampire that didn't eat people.
The vegetarian vampire.
Yes.
Yes, Sam seemed to always be gathering those people together, like the gray area monsters. Somehow I think he saw the gray area more clearly than Dean, at least in the beginning.
Well, I think Sam kind of identified with them because he once he found out about the demon blood, he did not feel like he was completely human himself, and so I think there was always some identification there, and he confronted Dean several times and said, so you're going to kill me too? You know, I'm no different. Well, yeah, you're different. You're Sam. No.
He'd been bad, and then he got over it. And he got past the idea of using demon blood.
Right.
So when you see a vampire and they say, no, I don't drink human blood, Sam sees it as the same way as himself. And is willing to give them the opportunity to try.
I just imagined having a vampire going, and this is my 300th year sobriety chip.
Oh, that's one. That is a good one.
So now we all have that stuck in our minds. Well, folks, I think, you know, there's so much we could mine here, but we've actually blown through our time. So I want to give you to tell where we can find you online, and we'll have to come back to this again because there's always more to say. Hansi?
Hansi Oppenheimer. You can find me at Squee Projects on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook.
Okay. Elektra.
I'm Elektra Hammond. You can find me at untilmidnight.com, and I'm Elektra at Wandering Shop on Mastodon. And everybody should go find Mastodon because it's way more fun than Twitter, and you know, it's not turning into a dumpster fire.
And I'm Gail C. Martin and Morgan Bryce. Both of those are my .coms and all my social media sites. So if you spell them right, you'll find me. Most of the time I'm here on Continual, and that's pretty easy to find as well. So thank you so much for being with us. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon. So we'll see you online.